I'm JoAnna, co-high priestess of the North Wyldewood Coven in the Temple of the Spiral Path, and I am here to tell you a little bit about the lore and magic of the Winter Solstice. Many of the celebrations around the world at this time of the Winter Solstice have certain things in common. One of those things is that it is a celebration of the longest night. This is the darkest point before the days start to get longer again. It's a time of rebirth and renewal, of honoring the sun and its soon-to-be growing power. This is the time when light will be returning. It's also a time of connection with our communities, both our families, our loved ones, our friends. This is a time of gathering together for feasts, for singing, for carousing in the streets, for playing games, and for divining what might be coming in the future. This is also a fire festival in many parts of the world. This is the time when that light of the sun is honored with fires in our own hearths, or just the candlelight that is on our tables when we gather together for meals. This is also a time of reflecting on the year that's passed. This is continuing from Samhain time, and it's also that in-gathering time when we think about what has happened, how we feel about it, and what we want to plan for the new year. Through all of this, it's an inner time of stillness, of meditating, of coming to understand things about ourselves, and also being inspired, perhaps with crafts or ideas or stories. So what is the winter solstice? In astronomy, the winter solstice, or Yule, occurs when one of the Earth's poles has its maximum tilt away from the sun, causing it to be quite cold. For the northern hemisphere, this happens on December 21st or 22nd, and it is the time of the longest night of the year and the shortest day. It also is the time when the sun appears at its lowest elevation in the sky. So you can see this even during the middle of the day. You can see, if you're far enough north, that the sun seems a little bit lower in the sky. This year, 2020, marks a very special conjunction happening at this winter solstice time. It is a great conjunction where Jupiter and Saturn will appear to meet in the sky. It's a very rare thing because it is something that can be seen with the naked eye. So if you can go outside on that night and you can look out at the horizon and it's a clear night, you might be able to see that very, very bright meeting of Jupiter and Saturn in the sky. This is also an especially rare one, which only happens every 200 years, in that this is a cycle change from an Earth cycle to an air cycle. And if you're curious to know more about the astrology of this time, I'll link to some interesting videos and articles about it below. I can't possibly talk about all the hundreds of amazing winter solstice traditions that have occurred around the world. So today, I will focus on a few of the celebrations that happened in the areas of the world where our four pantheons, which are worshipped in the shadow folk tradition, come from. And those cultures are the Egyptian, the Greco-Roman, and especially the Celts and the Norse. So beginning with the Celts, there are a few things that everybody might already know about how the Celts marked the winter solstice, and they are associated with two fabulous landmarks in the British Isles. One is Stonehenge in England, and the other is Newgrange in Ireland. These two late Neolithic and Bronze Age sites look to have been very carefully aligned, pointing to the winter solstice sunrise at Newgrange and the winter solstice sunset at Stonehenge. In more modern times, I'll mention a few of my favorite Celtic traditions and celebrations, starting with the Merry Lloyd. First recorded around the very beginning of the 19th century, this tradition involves a hobby horse made from a horse's skull mounted onto a pole and carried by a person who is hidden under a sackcloth or a sheet. This is one of many hooded animal traditions that exist throughout Great Britain. The Merry Lloyd's horse skull is often bedecked with ribbons and bells, and sometimes jewels are put in place of the eye sockets for the horse's head, which gives the horse a very unearthly and glittering look. The person who is controlling the Merry Lloyd can sometimes also have a small lever which can make the horse's jaws appear to snap closed and reopen, which can have a very frightening appearance if this creature is chasing you down a street. The Mary Lloyd would go with a group of people from house to house in a town or village, or sometimes between several different villages, and would knock on various doors and ask for entrance. And there's a very traditional song that goes with this, and the person controlling the Mary Lloyd asks to be let in, and the householders always try to prevent the Lloyd from entering the house. Eventually, the horse figure and the revelers are let inside, and they are treated to food and drink, and this allowing of the horse inside the house brings great blessings for those householders in the coming year. As with so many of these interesting Celtic celebrations, the historical roots of these modern practices are often difficult to discern, but this custom is sometimes referred to as the Holy Mare or Holy Mary, linking back to the stories of Mary and the baby Jesus, and also likely linking back to customs surrounding ancient horse goddesses and land goddesses, as well as practices of working with the ancestors and the spirits of the dead for fertility and protection in the coming year. This South Wales custom is just one of many examples of wassailing traditions found throughout Great Britain. Wassailing being the practice of going from house to house, singing songs, caroling, and asking for food and drink in return. This is part of so many celebrations of togetherness and celebrating the joys of having abundance and being able to share it that are found in many cultures around the world at this time. One other Celtic tradition that I'll mention involves burning something, which is very similar to a Yule log. It is the practice of burning something called the Christmas Old Wife, a cailleach, a tree stump that has been carved into a figurine of an old woman's head, is thrown into the household fire on Christmas Eve, where it is allowed to burn down completely. It's believed that in burning that, it will allow the household to prosper in the coming year and will keep negativity and harm away from those who dwell in the house. For our Norse friends, Germanic celebrations of this time of year are generally called Yule, sometimes spelled Y-U-L-E or J-U-L. In pre-Christian times, Yule was a midwinter festival that was celebrated with a lot of importance in the culture, likely over an extended period of time, falling anywhere between mid-November and early January. We have texts from as early as the 8th century discussing these heathen practices as still continuing. The god Odin himself bears the name Jolfather, Old Norse for Yule Father, and Jolnir, the Yule One. In Old Norse poetry, the word is often employed as a synonym for feast, such as in the kenning Hugin's Jol, Old Norse Hugin's Yule, a raven's feast. Similar to the celebrations in Celtic countries, this was a time of gift-giving, of celebrating togetherness, and of a lot of feasting. Sacrifices of animals would be made at this time, and often the blood from them would be saved in a special bowl and then used to bless the people as well as the walls of the temples and homes, using a special sacrificial twig. The meat of the animals thus sacrificed was then enjoyed by all of the people. Another important celebration at this time was Modernicht, Old English Night of the Mothers, or Mother's Night, also called Disablot. This blot, or holiday, was held in honor of female spirits or deities called the Disir. An 8th century historian wrote about the practice and said that Modernicht was celebrated by Anglo-Saxon heathens on December 25th. Its purpose was to enhance the coming harvests and was probably presided over mainly by priestesses. The practice was officially abolished during Christian times. However, there is still a market that celebrates the Disting, which happens in Uppsala in Sweden, and it is held at the beginning of February to this day. Some more modern Yuletide customs that have their roots in Germanic countries and are still celebrated today include decorating evergreens and burning a Yule log. Our modern traditions of decorating evergreen trees, sometimes with lights, sometimes with decorations made of paper or sweets or other things, has its origins in Germanic countries. The earliest accounts of it come from medieval Livonia and in early modern Germany, where decorated trees would be brought into the home. The evergreen is a beautiful symbol of the forces of life that even in this dark time still continue to be vibrant and that remind us that even in these dark days, spring will return. The first recorded reference to Yule logs date all the way back to 1184 in Germany, and given that date, it's very likely that Yule logs and traditions similar to it were found in pre-Christian earlier times. The tradition was very popular in Germanic areas and spread quickly throughout Europe, and then traveled to North America. Gathering the Yule log is an important part of the practice and was usually celebrated with a lot of singing and with children and adults celebrating the gathering and finding and bringing home of the Yule log. In some places, families would wake up early on the morning of Christmas Eve to go and find their Yule log and bring it home. In other places, the Yule log was found in February of the previous year and saved and dried all year to be ready for Christmas. Once inside the house, the Yule log is usually decorated and sometimes doused with wine and sweets and other symbols that will allow the household to prosper in the coming year. The ashes of a Yule log, and sometimes little pieces of the Yule log itself, are precious and sacred symbols which would be kept in the household in order to bring blessings and to heal the sick throughout the coming year. Much of our neo-pagan customs are, at their roots, workings to connect back to the rhythms of agriculture and the fertility of the earth and how that connects to the fertility and the cycles of our lives in the modern day. For that reason, the seasons are very important, which means that where in the world you are has a great deal to do with what you are celebrating at any given date. For our Greek, Roman, and Egyptian pantheons, they are, of course, much more Mediterranean climates, which means that their rhythms of nature are very different from the Norse and the Celts. That difference in climate leads to differences in celebrations, but there are still some interesting similarities and very beautiful celebrations. Heading to Egypt, we see that the Egyptian reckoning of time is very, very different from the Northern European one. For the Egyptians, life revolved around the flooding, the inundation, and the receding of the Nile itself. So at the winter solstice, there was not traditionally the same types of agricultural celebrations that the more northern climates had. However, there was a very important celebration that happened which honored the defeat of Seth, the god Set, by Horus, which happened right at the very beginning of what would be conceived of as our January. Moving to ancient Greece and Rome, and starting with our Roman friends, I'll begin with the best known, Saturnalia. Saturnalia was an ancient Roman festival that happened in honor of the god Saturn, held on the 17th of December, later expanded with festivities that went all the way through to the 23rd of December. The holiday was celebrated with a sacrifice at the Temple of Saturn, with many, many sacrifices happening at all different temples to Saturn throughout the Greek world. And then a long period of partying. This was a time of revelry. This was a time when masters and their servants might change places, where the usual order was turned on its head. People also exchanged gifts. The celebration of Christmas at the 25th of December owes its roots, in some ways, to Roman practices. For the Romans, there was another holiday that fell at this time, which was a celebration of the unconquered sun, Sol Invictus, which was held on the 25th of December. This holiday and this deity was extremely important to Roman soldiers, and the holiday also marked, as we've spoken about, the return of longer days after the winter. December 25th is also considered to be the birthday of the Indo-European deity Mithra, whose worship bears many, many similarities to Christ. The first recorded Christmas celebration was held in Rome, and it was held on December 25th, AD 336. Before this, there are no records of Christmas being celebrated at that time, and especially in some of the early Christian writers, there was a certain tradition of talking about how celebrating a god's birthday was something that only pagans or heathens would do. For the Greeks, this time of year was closely associated with marriage. The lunar month around this time was called Gamelion, when the Gamelia, or the sacred marriage of Zeus and Hera, took place. Also near to this time, but during the following lunar month, was the celebrations of Anthesterion, also known as the Older Dionysia. This was a celebration of the first openings of the clay vessels filled with wine for the year. First, libations would be made to the god Dionysus, and also at this time the doors of houses would be smeared with pitch, and buckthorn leaves would be chewed by people in order to banish potentially dangerous spirits of ghosts or ancestors that would walk abroad at this time. Offerings of honey and wine would also be made to the ancestors and the dead at this time. In many ways, this winter solstice time of year builds on the themes we talked about in our Samhain video, as it is when memory, storytelling, and indoor work is most important, along with crafting to prepare for what we'll need during the light half of the year, months from now. It's also a time that is perfect for divination. As we've seen in many cultures, the veil between the worlds was seen as very thin at this time, whether that is shown in the customs of the Merry Lloyd, the ghostly horse that chases people and comes into the home, the Greek offerings to the dead at the time of the older Dionysia, or the rites of Yule for the Norse. This is a time when spirits draw near and magic is very much afoot. In our modern culture, the practice of celebrating New Year's with resolutions and thoughts and wishes for the future is very much a part of that same ancient tradition of both looking backwards and forwards at this liminal moment. Using divination, we can get a little clarity around what we may want to work towards and dream on during these quiet inner months, using whatever tools call to us. Tarot, runes, scrying into water, or the flames of your Yule log burning in your hearth. Use what calls to you and use what you have. This is a time to also try something that's new. Although light will slowly begin to return after the Yule celebrations, there are many cold, tough days to come in January and February. The natural world around us, here in the Northern Hemisphere at least, is very much still asleep, and we'll likely be spending much more of our times inside than out in the coming months. But light will return. As the light begins to grow, so does our anticipation and our hope for the spring. So when you can, get outside and get your vitamin D and get some fresh air, take some brisk walks, and enjoy that the days will start to get longer. Take care of yourself, enjoy the celebrations and the quiet, powerful magic of midwinter, and take time to dream about what you might want to have come in the coming year. From all of us at the Temple of the Spiral Path and North Wyldewood Coven, we are wishing you many beautiful midwinter blessings and a very happy Yule.